Hello everybody. If you're a car person of any description, I bet you've spent the last few years moaning about how everything and anything now looks exactly the same, and there is no difference whatsoever between all of the cars offered by all of the manufacturers. And I bet in particular, when you saw what Ford think a Capri looks like now, you probably burst a blood vessel. But I have a home truth for you, and it's one you're not going to like. You can blame this on a whole bunch of different things if you like. You can blame it on emissions, you can blame it on safety, you can blame it on legislation, you can blame it on the EU, and you can blame it on EVs. But the fact is, it's not really the fault of any of those things. The reason all cars look the same now, well, that's us, the people that bought cars. Because, unfortunately, we're very predictable, we're very boring, and so manufacturers have become exactly the same. And in today's episode, I am going to be telling you about the tragedy of Darth Avantime the Unloved, what I think could be the beginning of the end for interesting cars. I wager if you're watching this video, there is a good chance that you do know what the Avantime is. But if for whatever reason you don't, it is a car made by Renault from 2001 until 2003. Although they didn't actually even build it. That task instead was given to Matra. Yes, the Matra, who have also built a few weird and wonderful cars of their own over the years, and also dabbled a little bit in Formula 1 too, to some modest success. However, the Avantime, even by the standards of French cars, is certainly a weird one. You see, at the time, Renault had the likes of the Clio, they had the Espace, which itself was a revolutionary thing. They also had the Megane, the Laguna, and I'm sure a couple of other cars that I forget. Perhaps by that time they stopped making the Renault Sport Spider, but they must have had a meeting at which they said, right lads, we need to build something new. What are we going to make? I've got ideas for a coupe, I've got ideas for a people carrier, I've got ideas for an SUV, and I've got some ideas for a convertible too. Which one are we going to go with? And somebody said, yes, let's do that. And so you wind up with this, a sort of coupe-inspired people carrier in which you sit a little bit high, but that has just the two very, very large doors on magnificent hinges with pillarless windows and a rather odd purpose in life that even 23 years later, I'm not sure Renault actually knew what that was. Because on the one hand, for those that were buying the Espace, this was then probably a little bit impractical, on account partly of the big doors, the fact that yes, it does have room in here, but not masses of it, and the boot is actually not horrible, but also a weird shape. I personally think that with it open, the car looks a little bit like a hungry hippo, or maybe a great big oil tanker from a James Bond movie about to gobble a submarine. And yes, before you say it, I do know that in The Spy Who Loved Me, the doors opened sideways. And frankly, I'm kind of shocked that they don't on this. It really is a rather wacky piece of styling, both outside and in, where you'll find an interior with lots of, well, it's not leather, is it? But nice shapes. They've also gone to some length to hide an awful lot of things, such as the stereo, which lurks below this now very sticky and awful looking cover, for which, by the way, if you do want to control it, you can use either the little stalk here or the remote. Oh, that could be dangerous, couldn't it, with children? Although, I do want to point out that even at their absolute maddest, their balmiest, even Renault didn't think that making touchscreens for the HVAC was a good idea. Okay, in 2001 a touchscreen would have been very, very space age and potentially quite cool, but also, you know as well as I do, by now it definitely would have broken. The dash up here, which also feels far, far too far away, is giving me Citroen C4 vibes. pretty sure it's nearly the same. Certainly the graphics look similar. The rev counter is hidden down here in a tiny little pod, which also seems like it's about 3 feet away, and possibly is. The seats are also slightly odd, offer you absolutely no lateral support whatsoever, and they're modestly comfortable. The back, as already mentioned, does have just about enough room, and this car has actually been bought by somebody who will use those back seats. My good buddy Ben from the channel Dad Cars. And as it happens, I think between the two of us, he now has by far the rarest car, because in the 2 years it managed to stay in production, Renault produced just over 8,500 of these. Of which how many came to the UK, we're not entirely sure, with numbers apparently ranging from 100 to 400. But when was the last time you saw a Renault Avantime on the roads? Yeah, exactly. Up front you then had a selection of either on the continent 4 engines or here 3. The one we missed out on was the diesel, which today is really no great shame, though I do wonder if maybe it would have sold better had it been offered then. What we were then left with is 2 versions of Renault's 4-cylinder engine, the F4R, this one being the turbo, the F4RT. The other option then was a naturally aspirated V6, the range topper, which I believe came exclusively with an automatic gearbox. This one then is what you might call the purist's choice, the Turbo 4 with a 6-speed manual, although not exactly really sure you would ever call one of these a driver's car, but regardless, I'm going to find out now just how good it is when you put your foot down. Oh, there we go. It does have some power. Exactly how much, I couldn't tell you because I didn't look it up. And even if I had, I wager a few of them might have escaped over the years. But today's video is not a review of the Avantime. I've done one of those already, and if you want to watch it, I'll put a link to it in the description down below. But this car, what it is, it's just different, it's weird, it's interesting, it's kind of fun. These days it's also very, very cheap. I think Ben paid just over £2,000 for this. And I guarantee you can turn up at just about any car show you can imagine, from a Hubnut meet to the Concours d'Elegance, and people will look at this Avantime. Granted, at the latter they may look at it and go, right, whose heap of old French muck is this? Someone summon security and have it and them ejected from the premises. But even so, it's just got so much going for it. Now, the reason I have all of the windows and the sunroof open, which I love, big panoramic item that does open at the front half, is because the aircon doesn't work. The traction control and ABS also usually don't work, though mercifully, when I went to start it for the review, they decided that they did want to play ball. Earlier, the car also said that it was low on oil, and I asked Ben if that was normal, and he said, well, the light comes and goes. I did ask if he'd checked the oil, and he said no. This car then came with him to the Sporting Bears event at Wickham Air Park, which in real time was last weekend. And there he used it to transport his large gazebo and also a selection of his children. And they then proceeded to use it as a creche. It has been bought deliberately so that the children can use it and he doesn't have to worry about it too much. But even before he got it, it wasn't in exactly immaculate condition. But that's fine, and I'm sure part of this gear lever is falling off, because every time I grab it, it feels a little bit weird. Oh yes, the topper is coming off. Before I forget, I also got to mention, this car has the funniest / most dangerous quirk I've ever seen. I did my shot of the engine, as I always do, and the rod that supports the engine is your standard issue thing, but at the end it's a big hook like that, for no real particular reason. It's also roasting hot, because that engine bay does get warm, in spite of its fancy vents above the lights that probably don't do anything. But anyway, when I then shut the bonnet, I heard that rod come loose. So I thought, right, okay, I don't want that rattling around and potentially causing damage. So I went to open the bonnet again, and when I lifted it up, the rod had caught a rather important line. It was either for aircon or coolant, I think aircon. But neither of those you want ruptured. You don't want aircon refrigerant everywhere, that's not nice stuff. It's just so So classically French, gassed to death by your own car. Oh dear. Yes, someone's already commented, haven't they? Oh, I thought that would be a German car. Well done. Yes, yes, yes. Very original. Anyway, I like driving this. Puts a smile on my face. And there are certain things that you realise old cars always just did well, that even nice new cars struggle with. The steering's actually half decent. The brakes, they work. It has wheels at all four corners. They're lovely. It's just something a little bit interesting. You're never going to lose this, are you, in the school run? And I don't think it was ever destined to be a particularly big seller, but also nor I think did Renault expect it to be quite as tragically bad a seller as it turned out to be. In fact, so bad a seller was it that Matra themselves soon went out of business, owing in part to the failure of it, and Renault themselves became increasingly conservative. At this time, they'd also introduced the Velsatis, which I think was equally as successful. And today, the Renault lineup does still have a few oddities in it, but they're not anywhere near as bold and interesting as this. And the thing is, when you try something different, in whatever field you are, there's always a chance that it just won't work. But every now and again, you happen upon an idea that really, really does. They had the Espace, itself a genre-defining and very important car. And what I really fail to understand myself is that way back when, and I'm not even talking, 50 years ago, I'm talking 25 years ago, every manufacturer had in some small way their niche. And so, if you wanted to buy yourself a nice, luxurious car, you'd go and buy a Mercedes-Benz. If you wanted an upmarket saloon, but a slightly sporty one, you could buy yourself a BMW. If you wanted an even more upmarket one, you could buy a Jaguar. And if you wanted one even further up the scale again, you could buy yourself a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce. Meanwhile, if you wanted a rugged, dependable off-roader, you could go and buy yourself a Toyota Land Cruiser. Or if you wanted a rugged, less dependable one, you could get yourself a Defender if you wanted something with an air of workmanlike about it. Or you could get yourself a Range Rover if you wanted an air of Lord of the Manor about it. If you then wanted a nice, small, buzzy hot hatch, Honda would be happy to provide, as occasionally were Toyota. If you wanted a nice, small, entertaining sports car, quite a few manufacturers did those. But generally speaking, though there was of course some crossover, particularly with the mainstream brands, you still knew that each car had its own identity. I am a great believer that a car does say a lot about a person. This is a big purchase, and maybe for some, all that purchase really says is, I don't care about cars. But still, it says something. And okay, for the likes of Saab and Volvo, that was safety. And later, other manufacturers were forced to think about that, at which point Saab and Volvo did lose a little something of what made them unique. But even so, they were interesting cars. Even a Saab, based on a General Motors platform, isn't the same as the General Motors equivalent, your Vauxhall or Opel of the day. I think perhaps for me, the reason that this new Capri is so egregious, why it is so distasteful, isn't the fact that it could be literally anything. Ford could have stuck basically any badge on that car and it wouldn't have stood out. And maybe they know that, and that's why they've called it Capri, because had they called it the Dave, nobody would have been talking about it. It is a completely forgettable car. But that's Ford's problem. I think the bigger issue really, and I'm somebody that never likes to say, oh well, don't say that's not a proper Ferrari, it's got a Ferrari badge on it, therefore it is. No. Let's forget this for a second. Ford themselves were so clever with the original Capri because they gave the market something that in a lot of ways it didn't have. It was a European Mustang. It was a car made explicitly for our needs, and it was a car that was built to give people something that they really wanted, but at the time maybe didn't know about it. It was the car you always promised yourself. It was nice, muscular, sleek looking thing with a range of engines, from those at the more economical end of things up to the nice big meaty 2.8 and 3 litre lumps. They were cool cars for cool men who loved them and now have great nostalgia about them, even though if you do actually drive a Capri today, They're not very good. But that's fine, because they meant something to people. They were something a little bit different. That's why they were such a success. This new one, it's a nothing car. I think if Ford really, really wanted to stand out, what they actually should have done is revive the spirit of the old Capri. They're going to revive the name. Give us an EV coupe. Give us something sexy. Show us that innovation at Ford Motor Company isn't dead. Show us that you can give us something that we thought maybe we couldn't have. Because if you could have built a, let's call it, 50 grand car that doesn't have stellar performance but looks pretty good, styling cues inspired by the original, it's a classic shape, people love it, and I'm sure it would be easy to do a modern update, that would be interesting. And okay, maybe people still wouldn't buy it because the people that like old Capris, they're only ever going to like old Capris. You could basically build a new one that's exactly the same, they still wouldn't like it, but you could at least give it a shot. But instead they've gone, nah, you know what, we're going to give you a car that's maybe slightly less inspiring version of the Mustang Mach-E. I did actually think that maybe for the new Capri they would have at least tried to integrate a couple of little nods to the first car. Maybe just the profile of the windows, something like that, but no, if they're there, I didn't spot them. I think maybe a more successful go at this was the Honda CR-Z, which, okay, also didn't have the Banzai character and nature of the old CRX that it was clearly designed to look like, but it was something a little bit different, something a little bit interesting, and I think for that, more successful and worth praising. That actually may be a little bit not quite as extreme as the Avantime, but is a car today that is actually maybe even more relevant than it was when it was new. And unfortunately, car businesses, and I appreciate they are businesses, they were always ones made up of elements of both passion and bean counting. And the passionate people were the ones that gave us the GT3s, the bean counters, they gave us the Cayennes. And the truth is, the world needs both. And businesses need both. Do you think Lamborghini would really have sold as many Urus as they have if they hadn't for the last 50 years built up this amazing image of Countach, Diablo, Aventador, Murcielago, Gallardo, Huracan? No, of course not. Otherwise they couldn't justify the double the price of an Audi RS Q8, which we all know underneath is the same thing. They just couldn't have. Brands need to mean something, and with the transition towards electric, we're losing a large part of what made some of them stand out, which is the difference in engine formats. Would you really call a 911 without a flat six a 911? Porsche didn't. They called it the 912. What happened, sadly, is that as time went by and we had the likes of the financial crisis and things got tight, the bean counters took over. And they simply looked at the models which had nice big margins and sold in good quantities. And they said, okay, yeah, cool, let's just build a lot more of those. And they completely missed the point of the halo cars, whose job was never, ever to sell. Their job was to sell other cars in the lineup. I mean, look at Maserati. Stellantis have got that company completely wrong. They shouldn't be making affordable cars. They should be making desperately sexy, lusty cars that you want to get your hands on, but you can't. So instead you get the next best thing, which is an Alfa Romeo. So the company has still made money. Isn't it obvious? Apparently not. But actually, in a lot of ways, the transition to EV is now giving manufacturers a new lease of life, or at least it should, because the way motors and batteries work, well, you can put them in places that you just couldn't put an engine. One of those, there's only a few places in a car you can put it. It's a certain size, it's a big solid lump of metal, and that creates a lot of issues, particularly when you have to meet modern emissions, crash, and all other regulations. EVs, much easier. We should be seeing a real design renaissance. And at the top end of things, with hypercars, 2-3 million quid stuff, well, we've never had it so good. Yet, for the affordable stuff, the bread and butter, the real volume stuff that for companies like Ford, Renault and so on will keep them alive, they've become even more conservative than ever. And I think these companies, they need to stop, they need to stand back, and they need to go, right, okay, we need to be brave, because guess what? If Ford had made a £50,000, £60,000 coupe EV that they called the Capri, sure, it wouldn't have been affordable to everybody, but it would be enticing, and it would be a way to give them something I've been complaining they've been missing for a while. That's a halo car. They need something to entice and excite young buyers. Give the kids something to talk to dad about. This was my Capri Sun, this one day could be yours. Just not doing it though, are they? And the companies that fail to innovate now, at this crucial juncture in time, they're doomed. Just look at this. It's the Hyundai Envision 74 concept, and rumour has it they're going to be putting a version of it into production sometime soon. If they do, how much do you think people buying it will care that it's electric? They won't. They'll buy it because it's just damn cool and it's different. And which one looks closer to a 21st century version of a classic 70s coupe, I ask you? This or the Ford Capri? More to the point, which one sets your pulse racing? For me, that is the job of a car like Capri. They won sales because they excited you. And as for Ford's marketing team, well, they have well and truly lost the plot, because according to Ford themselves, they think Capri is rebellious because it has standard fit driver's massage seats. They also make a big deal about the fact that it has a hidden storage compartment behind its touchscreen, forgetting that 10 years ago Chevrolet did it in the Corvette. And they also proudly tell you this is the return of a legend. And I can say with some degree of certainty that not one single person who ever owned an old Capri wanted it to come back like this. It's the pet cemetery Capri. Nobody asks for it, and I think right now all we would like is for it to go back from whence it came. And I do feel bad for the companies like Renault, who over the years have tried, have done the different things, the odd things, and then maybe realised that, sod it, let's just try stuff that we know will sell. I'm a movie fan. I love films, always have. But you know what I'm getting bored of? Endless Marvel, Disney, comic book stuff. How many series of Star Wars exactly do we really need? I'm so far behind, I can't even keep up. And this is a franchise that built its legacy, let's not forget, on 3 films released over a period of 6 years. 3 films to build a legacy, which somehow they didn't destroy with the Star Wars Holiday Special. I'm not saying that all of these cars that I'm talking about are bad things, of course they're not. There is a place in the world for ordinary, decent, dependable, unremarkable stuff. There always will be. We need those cars. We need Mondeos. We need the Focus. We need the Espace. Heaven rest its soul. I wish we bought more MPVs and less SUVs, because I was under the impression we were supposed to be caring about the environment, and I'm just not entirely convinced how a 3-ton, 1,000 horsepower car, by whatever method you power it, is achieving that. I'd instead like to see a return to innovative, genuine thinking. I'd like to see more countries, like in the Netherlands where they have microcar rules, and I think France is the same, or in Germany where they have, I think they call them, not really a trike, but you know, you get those Fiat 500s where the wheels at the back get squidged together by a guy. I saw one of those a few weeks ago when I was abroad. We need ways of exciting people, getting them into motoring. Let's make interesting, exciting, affordable things, innovative materials, clever construction methods. Let's do stuff right. The smart car was such a good idea. The smart car was brilliant. I want to buy a smart car. I know it sounds weird, it sounds strange, but it was the solution. I want to see London filled with smart cars, not Urus and G-Wagons. Having a really good time in this as well. Gives you that wind in the hair feeling. Ben's out in the Scuderia. I'm sure he's having a terrible time. Anyway, that I think is enough from me. I hope you've enjoyed today's rant, and if you have, don't forget to comment, give me your opinion, hit that like or dislike button, you know, I'm fair. Hit subscribe too, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.